Welcome to the Exposing Scientology podcast, where we delve into what really goes on in the world of Scientology and Scientologists, and sometimes take side journeys into other organizations that display similar traits. I'm very happy to welcome back Val Ross, who was on one of our podcasts just recently talking about her involvement in Scientology, sort of historically, her involvement with the Guardian's office, and becoming a Scientology spy in the FBI. There is a lot more to Val's story that I want to start taking up with her today. Welcome back, Val.
Hi again, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. You asked that we start with another one of your wonderful quotes. You remember in the last episode, I'd pulled a bunch of quotes from your story that was published on Tony Ortega's blog or his Substack, and also on your own. And I linked to both of those in the one that I did before, and I will have the links for this one too in the blog post that I do concurrent with the release of this. But your perspective on things is always really interesting. And so let me just read you this quote that you pulled out and said, I think we should start with this one. I know there were secrets in every room, and that we were taught that to spill our secrets was to besmirch our honor. The programming is hard to break through. Even telling this, I feel like I am betraying the people who put me in this position. Why did you feel that that was important to get out?
Because this has been a really hard story for me to tell. I have felt almost dirty sometimes telling it. Like I have almost like I've betrayed L. Ron Hubbard. And then it's like, why do I care? That's that. And I look at that and it's like, I've done these horrible things to betray this group. And then I have to tell myself, no, this group did horrible things to me. And it's really hard to get past the brainwashing, the programming that they put in you to make myself understand that I have to tell this story. They have made me be quiet all these years. They programmed it into me that these were important secrets and we could not harm the founder of Scientology by spilling these secrets, which actually really, really need to be told.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more, Val. You know, the idea that it's easy to break free of the ways of thinking and the brainwashing that goes on in Scientology is really misunderstood by a lot of people who have not experienced it. It is the hardest thing to rid yourself of these patterns of thought and patterns of action that have been so heavily indoctrinated into you. It takes years.
I've been out almost 40 years now. Well, 40 years no, it's been 40 years now. And there are still times when I'll think, oh, they're playing the victim in this. Wait a minute, back up. Why did you even think that? Things like that. 40 years later.
I know. The victim one is a really big one. It
Yes.
is huge in Scientology because you're persuaded that being a victim is a really, really, really bad and dishonorable thing, and that you're never a victim. You're always the cause of your own condition. That is a horrible, horrible thing.
Yes. Yes, because it makes you take responsibility for things other people should.
Yes, exactly. And makes you feel bad about reporting or saying that someone else did something that was victimizing you.
Makes you not report something someone else did. Let's get real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, which is the big topic that I want to talk to you about today, which is the horrifying story of the abuse that you suffered at the hands of your boyfriend, then became husband in Scientology, and how Scientologists and the organization treated that abuse. And I mean, honestly, reading some of the things that you wrote, and the physical abuse is just one of the hardest things that I have read for a long time. So why don't you sort of set the stage and tell us what you think is important to know about this?
Well, okay, when he was my boyfriend, which was a very, very short period of time, he was a good guy, a really nice, cheery, never ever even I didn't even have a clue that he might even be a mean person. Let's start
Hmm.
there. I met him in January. We were married in April. And
Got it.
the doctor told us we were in love. So yeah, I was pregnant when we were married. So, and it was Scientology. And of course we had to get married, and we immediately had to get married. And especially because of my position, it's like we had to hurry up and get that wedding out of the way. But the day we got married, we got home from the wedding. Well, it was the next morning. We got up. I was pregnant. I was not feeling good. We were going to go to Disneyland. And my parents were staying in a motel, and they were coming over, and the whole family was going to go to Disneyland. And I got up and I wasn't feeling good. And I was just doing my best to, like, okay, we're going to Disneyland. And he said something, and I reached over and ruffled his hair, and he went ballistic, totally threw a massive fit, yelling, screaming, hollering, "What the fuck are you doing?" He just, I didn't even recognize who this person was.
Hmm.
And I was like, I think I've made a mistake. I need to leave. We should not have done this. And okay, I had a college education. He was a high school dropout. He went, "You can't live on your own. You can't figure out how to do this. You will never make a living on your own. You're pregnant. You can't survive without me." And managed to convince me I couldn't survive without him.
Uh-huh.
And I realized right then I was trapped. And my parents came over and we went to Disneyland, and I got home that night and threw up for about 3 hours. And of course, I had a massive headache, but it was Scientology, so I didn't get to take anything for it, and just threw up for a few hours. And that
Just
was
for anybody that doesn't know, explain why you weren't allowed to take anything for a headache.
because you don't take any drugs, period. Aspirin is a drug. So, yeah, no
It,
drugs.
it is so insane because Val, that, and I've told this story before, that L. Ron Hubbard used to tell his Commodore's messengers to take Motrin for period headaches and cramps. Like,
No, I did not know that.
when I told Christy that after I met her, she was like, "Are you absolutely kidding me? Are you
Oh,
serious? I
oh,
suffered every month for years, and
oh,
I could have taken Advil or something to help me." I said, "Yep."
oh.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's crazy. The world of Scientology has got some really weird things happening in it. Okay, so I got it. That was the first thing. What happened subsequent to that?
Well, I figured out that he had my pink slip and that he owned me, I guess, basically. I mean, it was really weird, but for some reason, I just surrendered to him. I had already, I guess, been browbeaten by Scientology enough that I just kind of accepted that it was, well, plus the Scientology wedding ceremony. I mean, I actually went through the whole Scientology wedding ceremony, the L. Ron Hubbard Scientology wedding ceremony, and it basically said the woman is subservient, and you're supposed to treat her like a little girl, you know. And I basically just went, oh well, this is part of my world now. And so subsequent to that, it was just kind of like it escalated. It was probably a few months. I mean, he was very jealous, but it was a month or two before he actually physically hit me.
Right. And you have a really interesting comment somewhere along the line where you say, on the outside, when you see an abusive relationship, people think run, run, run. But that's the deal with abuse, both in Scientology and abusive relationships. The abuser doesn't abuse you physically until long after they've broken you mentally. By the time physical abuse starts, the mind is so broken that you don't realize you can run.
Right. Right. That is so true, because I didn't think I had a choice to run. I did not believe I could walk. It's so odd looking back on it. Because it's like I was the one making the money in the relationship. I was he was going to course. I could have walked out and paid for my own rent somewhere else. I could have kicked him out and paid for my rent in that place. I held all the cards basically, but
Right.
he had me convinced that I couldn't survive without him.
Right. And also there is as you mentioned, the Scientology indoctrination that plays into this. What did you do to pull it in? You're always the cause of your own condition, that you can't be a victim. I'm sure that must have played a part in this mental prison that you ended up getting put into.
Well, he would say things like, "Why do you keep making me so angry? Oh, why do you do those things to me? Why are you doing things that," I mean, okay, I was pregnant. I would go grocery shopping. I would carry up a bag of groceries and he'd say, "Why did you carry that bag of groceries up? You're not supposed to lift heavy things while you're pregnant." So I would leave the bag of groceries in the car and ask him to carry it up. And he would say, "What? You can't carry up your own groceries? What's wrong with you?" So
Right.
there was absolutely no way I could do something to please him. But I started trying, it's like if he'd say, this is what you did wrong, I would do the exact opposite. And then that was what I did wrong.
Oh, Val, I'm so familiar with
I
that
know.
pattern of operation, the old heads I win, tails you lose routine of no matter which way you go, you're always wrong. Also, this idea that what are you doing that you're doing things that are making me upset. I mean, I
Yeah.
must have heard that from, Miscavige and his, entourage 1,000 times. You're upsetting COB. You're the one that's causing all this, while he's wailing on people and punching and kicking and throwing stuff at him. The whole idea is, well, A, you caused this. B, what did you do to pull it in? And C, you're upsetting the great dear leader, and you should be horrified and ashamed of yourself for having caused that effect on him.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I actually, if you go way down the line in my story, when somebody actually finally told one of my bosses that he was beating me,
Yep.
and my bosses told him that they had been told that, and I got fired because he was beating me, because he convinced my bosses that I was a liar. And then he came home and was beating me while he was telling me I was lying to people, telling them he was a wife beater.
Oh my God. I don't mean to laugh about this,
I
Val,
know.
but
Well, it's funny now, all these years later. It wasn't very
well,
funny then.
it's not funny, haha. It's funny,
Right.
like rejecting the absolute insanity of this. And the
Yes.
reason why I react that way is the exact same thing happened to me, except my abusive relationship was with David Miscavige, not with the
Right.
spouse. And he would be, beating people up or beating me up or physically attacking me about my failure to prevent the media from saying that he was physically attacking people.
Right.
Okay. So how do you win this? The answer is you don't.
No.
You don't. But you also say something else that's really, really interested me in this, where you said you talked about and went through some of the details about the physical abuse and where you were being hit and being kicked with steel-toed cowboy boots. And then this guy would cry and say he was sorry and tell me he loved me. I never felt so loved or so hated as when I was married to him, sometimes both in the same minute.
Yep.
Explain that.
Once he finished beating me, he turned into the person I knew that I married. He would just all of a sudden, whatever that was that caused him to beat me would turn off. And then he would tell me in baby talk, I love you so much. I couldn't live without you. And he really, in his own twisted way, meant it.
Right.
And it was kind of freaky. But he did a pretty good job of convincing me. That was the scary part, is that he could convince me he loved me after he destroyed me.
Yes. And again, I identify with this 1,000%. The number of times that I had David Miscavige physically attack me, and then once done, calm down and turn around and offer a glass of scotch, or take a seat, it'll be okay, we really need to get focused on what we need to be doing tomorrow, as if nothing had happened, and now I was back being best buds again, just like minutes after having literally physically assaulted me. And this is, I don't know, I guess it's a characteristic of a malignant narcissist or a sociopath or whatever, that keeping you off balance that way and keeping you sort of on a string somehow is part of the skill and the game that they play. I don't know. What's your thought about that?
I think he believed I would never leave him. I think he believed he had me on a string, like he said. It was part of his game, but it was also, he knew in his mind. He did not just believe, he knew in his mind that he had me trapped in whatever it was he was playing, and that I was just part of the world he had created for himself, part of the comfort he had created for himself.
Right. And how did the organization or the ethics officers or whatever play into this?
Okay, the first time I ended up in the hospital is when the ethics officers finally came into play. I didn't say anything to anybody about him hitting me because I knew it wouldn't make a difference.
Right.
And
why? Why did you
because I
know
was a
that?
girl.
Okay. But there's not really a policy in Scientology that says one way or the other, male or females get treated differently. So why did you feel that?
Because when I was at ASHO, we didn't cover this in the other podcasts, but when I was in ASHO, I had been physically attacked by a guy. I had by a guy that was senior to me, and he had gotten off with nothing, and I had gotten, basically that's how I got into the GO, because they had a declare against me at ASHO saying that I was a bad person because this guy had raped me. So it was like, I kind of got the hint that it was, you don't report this stuff because the person that they consider the best person was going to be the one that didn't get in trouble.
Right.
As far as the GO considered me, I was somebody that worked for them, but Mark was somebody who was a student on course. So Mark was more important to the value of Scientology because he paid money to them.
I hear you. So I agree with you about that one. I think that that is generally how it goes in Scientology. He who has or gives the most money has what's called ethics protection in Scientology. And anybody that says anything against or about them that is negative as is treated as targeting an upstat, and that person ends up being investigated for why you trying to take down someone who is supportive of Scientology.
Yes.
So I completely understand that. I was just curious about what your perspective is to why not report. And I understand why. I was just wondered what you would say in response to the question more
Yeah.
than my own personal curiosity. I'm kind of interested in hearing your perspective of it and what viewers or listeners may get from your perspective about these things, because you don't need to explain any of this to me.
Right.
We're having this conversation so we can explain it to other people, really.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I understand that. You know exactly what yeah, but the question is a good one because it's like, in the same situation, you probably wouldn't have bothered either.
Right. Of course not.
Yeah, wouldn't have been worth your time.
Right.
But when I ended up in the hospital, then all of a sudden it became the guardian's office problem because they were like, oh no, this is going to be a PR flap. This is going to be a public relations problem for Scientology.
That you were in the hospital because your husband beat you up.
Right. But
Right.
that's my problem. I
Right.
shouldn't have let him beat me up so badly I ended up in the hospital. So.
The insanity of this is beyond comprehension, but it's perfectly normal to someone that understands how the stuff works. This is just like, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay, here's the real insane part, and this is the part you will get, and people listening to it who haven't dealt with Scientology will probably come out of their chairs for it. I'm in the ER. The police are there. Mark is there, and somebody
Mark
from the
is we haven't even mentioned his name. That's your husband.
Yeah.
At
My
the time.
ex-husband, please.
Ex-husband, sorry.
We've been divorced for 40 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he's there. The police are there. A couple of people from the GO walk into the ER. The police turn around and walk out. The end.
Why? Why did they walk out?
Because the people from the GO showed up. They saw the people from the GO. They turned around. They walked out.
Wow. And then what happened?
And then the people from the GO got me released with no pain meds because, I wanted to go home. I signed out against medical advice, right? And then I had to go see the ethics officer because I'd been so horrible that I almost caused a PR flap for the guardian's office.
Oh my God. Oh my God. And what happened to Mark?
He went back on course the next day.
It's incredible. I mean, but this is standard operating procedure in Scientology. I just don't know how to describe it or to make sense out of it in any way, shape, or form other than this indoctrination that occurs in Scientology is so powerful that people lose their morality, their sense of what's right and wrong, their ideas of what's normal and abnormal, and you become something that you don't start out being.
Way something you don't start out being. Mentally, physically, morally. Yeah.
I know. And you comment somewhere along the line about how Mark's sister told their mother that, well, he had been beating you up. And how did she respond to that?
She must have done something to deserve it.
And she was a Scientologist.
Yeah, she died of a brain tumor. OT8.
Well, she was at OT8 and died of a brain tumor?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry she died of a brain tumor, but
Yeah.
that heartlessness and that lack of empathy for a daughter-in-law being physically abused by your son is really, really hard to swallow. How did this end? What happened that ultimately put an end to this?
To Mark,
Yeah.
it was a mind flip. It was really weird. Okay, my mom died on my birthday in 1983. Mark, I was still married to Mark at the time. We were not happily married, but we were still married. In 1984, a year later, my father was dying, and he was having his affairs and telling me about them. And I had been fired from my job for my boss's cousin telling my boss that Mark beat me up. And my boss was also a Scientologist.
Right.
And yeah. And so I was home, and it was pretty brutal because I wasn't even allowed out of the house or anything by that point. And Mark would just go wherever he wanted. And he told me he was going to go see his girlfriend on the birthday, the anniversary of my mom's death. My birthday, my anniversary of my mom's death. And
Lovely.
Yeah, I looked at him and I said, if you have any respect at all for me, you won't leave today. And he looked at me and he said, fuck you. And for some reason, that was what I needed to hear. My mind just went, no. That's it. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve this life. What am I doing? What have I been doing? It was a mind flip. It was a total, this is it, the end, period. And I was just like, I woke up after all those years. I just slammed awake. And I first of all went, okay, I know that he's going to be really upset, but I've got to do this. So I called the girlfriend and told her, hey, Mark and I are still married. We're not separated. This is the last time you had sex, da, da, da. And by the way, tell him not to bother to come home. There's no room in the inn. And she was very upset, obviously. And then I, at that point, tried to call a locksmith, but I didn't have any money except my money in my secret savings account, which was, the statement was mailed to my parents' house. The money was in an account in LA, and I didn't really have access to it. It wasn't like we could go to ATMs like we do these days.
Right.
I went next door to a guy that my daughter knew his daughters. He was a single father. I barely knew him. And I just said, this is going down. This is what's going to happen. You've got to take my kids. And he was like, sure, I'll take your kids. He took my kids. And about then, Mark called and told me to, quote, thank you for fucking it up with me and the woman. You're talking to your wife. He says, what the fuck am I supposed to do now? And I'm like, I don't think that's really my problem anymore. And he says, well, I'm going to make it your problem. And I went, okay, here it goes. And so he came about 4 minutes later. He came roaring in the house, left the front door open. And between when he hung up and when he came in the house, I had called the police.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently my neighbor next door had also called the police saying, this is not good. Something bad's going to happen. This is the address. So they knew something was going down. And one of the things he had been doing to me several times is when I was over in the kitchen cutting things up, is he would come over and he'd put his hand across my hand and he'd caress it gently and he'd say, that knife you're using, I could use that to kill you,
Good God, what a creep.
Yeah. And so he went running in the kitchen and grabbed that butcher knife and immediately started cutting me. And I have a scar that goes like from under my arm here to all the way up here to the inside of my elbow from him. It's like, yeah. And so when the cops got there, the door was wide open still. And that was good because they just didn't have to break down the door or anything. And I was just laying on the couch. And because I'm a Scientologist or was a Scientologist, I wasn't making any noise because, engrams. And he's just beating me, but he's yelling and hollering and screaming and beating me and cutting me. And the cops handcuffed him and took him away. And that's how it ended. And that's how I quit Scientology and everything. Just like, and they called an ambulance and got me to the hospital.
I'm so sorry, Val. Every time I read this or hear you recount it, it breaks my heart that it took that to put an end to the insanity that you went through for so long. I have enormous respect for you for surviving and speaking out about this, because I know how hard it must be. This is like, those sort of emotional scars don't go away in a big hurry.
No, no, it's, yeah.
In any event, I wanted to, I'm not trying to make you have to relive these horrible things. I just think it's important for as many people as possible to hear. That was the end of your relationship with him. What happened to him? Did he ever get in trouble? Did anything ever happen to him? You just walked away from Scientology? Did anything happen after that?
Utah really didn't have very many abuse laws in place. Well, the U.S. didn't have many abuse laws in place in '84, honestly. So because he didn't kill me, he didn't get in much trouble. He did spend a couple of nights in jail, but he honestly didn't get in very much trouble. And he ended up marrying that girl 36 minutes after our divorce was final.
Jeez.
Yeah, so she deserves it, and they're still married. So as for me, I was actually really as lucky as you can be when you just get beat up like that and hospitalized. It probably was really good for me because it's an attorney of the Vancott, Bagley, Cornwell, McCarthy, which doesn't even exist anymore, was back then was the largest law firm in the U.S. And one of the things they did is they had attorneys that were required to do pro bono work. And so I'm laying there in my bed in the hospital, and the nurse said that there was an attorney to see me, and I'm like, oh great, now I'm going to lose my kids. Yeah. And so, and he came in and he said, I'm here to help you. And I laughed. I just like, oh, okay, whatever. And he said, well, it doesn't sound like you've had anybody say that to you lately. I'm just like, no, I haven't. And so he started talking quietly to me, explaining all my options. And he and his wife happened to be foster parents, and they were able to take my children into his home immediately. So they had a place to stay until I could get out of the hospital. And he was the attorney that did my divorce for me. And his assistant quit while he was in the process of that, and while I was still in the hospital, and he hired me. I didn't have legal experience. He was a partner at a law firm, and he hired me.
Absolutely amazing. He, in your write-up, is like one of those unsung heroes who, like the people that took in the Jews and protected them from the Nazis in World War II. Here was this guy that appeared just because of his good heart and good nature and kindness and empathy and sympathy. He helped you back on your feet, and not only just helped you back on your feet, helped you establish a new life.
Yes.
I mean, amazing.
He got me a sign-on bonus. I didn't realize at the time that didn't happen. I didn't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think that came out of his pocket, but it was a check from the company because he knew I wouldn't take it from his pocket. Things like that. He helped me establish a new life.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. just talking about this now, so that was your sort of end of the road as far as Scientology goes.
Right.
You say in one of your write-ups, I not only had to unlearn robotic behaviors and responses, but had to relearn how to feel.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in Scientology, it's strangely enough, they tell you you're supposed to be sane and all that kind of stuff. They teach you how to be a robot. That's all Scientology teaches you. The first thing you learn how to do is learn how not to feel. You learn how not to respond to any emotion. It's interesting because it actually came in handy for me shortly after I got out of Scientology, because I was standing in line at a pharmacy, and I was holding my son. He was really sick. He had a fever, and I was waiting for his prescription. And this guy came up to me, and he was just off the wall. And he was yelling and screaming right in my face. And I just kind of stood there and looked at him. and he's like, oh, fuck you. Walked out. But it was like, but Scientology came in handy right then, because it was just like, you just learn how to not respond, period. Not feel, not care. And it carries over into your life. You don't hurt. I mean, well, I had kind of had to learn how not to hurt when I was getting beat on all the time.
Right.
But it turns your emotions off. You don't feel joy. You don't feel pain. You don't feel anything. You just don't feel. You just sort of walk through life, and somebody says, oh, you're supposed to be excited. Oh, okay, I'm excited now. But it's not real. It's just this fake thing.
I totally understand. You also make a comment in there about counseling was what I needed to get my feet back under me. It was so amazing to talk to someone who actually asked you questions about what was bothering me, not some robotic stuff. Tell me about that.
I was so unimpressed with any Scientology counseling I got. I was really upset, honestly, when I went into Scientology counseling, because all it was a series of robotic questions. And the questions really had nothing to do with life. They were just like, okay, recall a time you saw a blue house. Can you think of an earlier similar time? Can you think of an earlier? I don't care about blue houses. What about the time I broke my leg? If we need to handle what happened in my life. We don't need to handle this list of things that Hubbard thought was important to ask. When you go through the grades and you're supposed to go clear, you would think that you would handle the things that happened in your life, not a list of recall when you couldn't communicate with somebody. Recall another time you couldn't. Oh, give me a break.
Right.
Yeah. So when I went into counseling and they said, now let's talk about what happened in your life. Tell me about that. I mean, this is kind of even just like you and me talking here on this podcast. I'm telling you things that actually occurred. If I had done that while I was in Scientology, I did once, okay? I did. I sat there and somebody said, why are you ambidextrous? And I said, well, it's kind of a strange story. But when I was 5, I fell out of a mulberry tree. I was left-handed until then, but I broke my arm and all the bones stuck out. So I had to learn how to use my right hand to write. And they said, oh, you shouldn't talk about that unless you're in session. Oh my gosh.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Why?
I guess I was talking about my case.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
I know.
That's absolutely nuts, Val.
Yeah.
Absolutely nuts. Okay, but you touched upon this, how disappointed you were with auditing. You also write a bit about the OT levels. Tell me about that.
Oh, OT1. Oh my gosh. I was actually angry when I got the materials for OT1, because when you first get into Scientology, you learn how to do what's called a locational.
Right.
Okay. A locational basically is you go and you touch things until you feel like you're in present time. Okay. That's kind of a locational. So you get the materials for OT1 and it tells you to go do a stinking locational. And you're like, excuse me? I paid all. I didn't have to pay because I was in the guardian's office, but it's still like, this is supposed to make you something special. You go to a stinking locational and you're okay. So I did it, but it was like, and then OT2 was even stranger. And then when I hit OT3, I was just kind of like, I'm being put on.
Yeah. Let's just set the stage for people who may not know. OT stands for operating thetan, and it is the state that Hubbard sort of laid out as, here is the ultimate goal of Scientology. You need to become an operating thetan, meaning that you can operate independently of your body, that you can control the world around you, the physical universe, and that you are going to become a sort of a superhuman or a super being, and that this all happens on the quote operating thetan levels, which is 1, 2, 3 up to 8, and that the big one is OT3, which Hubbard designated as the quote wall of fire. And this is the story that he tells, which is the story of evil galactic overlord who sent people to Earth 75 million years ago and blew them up in volcanoes with hydrogen bombs. And that all of these people, or, beings, are now attached to your body. Every person on Earth has these beings attached to them, and they influence your way of thinking. They influence your actions. I know that this sounds stupid to say. There's a lot of this that makes absolutely no sense, like all of it. But these dead, Hubbard called them dead beings, who somehow are supposedly influencing you on what you think and do. Now, OT3 is this story in Hubbard's handwriting. There's no doubt that this is what he said in his handwriting, explaining this whole story and telling you, okay, so you need to get rid of all these things that he called body thetans, meaning body beings that are attached to you, and that you use an e-meter to do this. And this is supposed to be the great revelation of Scientology. It is the sort of ultimate thing that you discover in Scientology, which is going to set you free. I want to hear what your reaction was when you read that material, Val.
I was already pretty upset from 1 and 2. And when I read that, it was like, I want to leave. I want to go talk to somebody about this. And then I thought, well, you can't talk to anybody about your case. And I started to pick up the cans, and then I thought, I'm not even going to start this. And then I reread it, and I thought, of course, because I'm a good little Scientologist, I have a misunderstood word. And I'm reading through all of this, and it's like, this is not a misunderstood word. I don't understand any of this. This doesn't even make any sense. This is just stupid. And then I went, oh, do I need to go back and start over with OT1? Did I miss something there? Because that's what you always think, it's like, it's always your fault.
Right.
No, I'll just do this. It's fine. I got it. And then you just pretend that you got it and you go on, because you can't talk to anybody. You can't tell anybody what you're feeling. You can't talk about it.
Right.
It's confidential, and you can't talk about your case. He's got you coming and going.
Yep. We talked about that in the last episode where you said, for an organization that prides itself on supposedly being the masters of communication, the thing about Scientology is it teaches you not to communicate. It's a very, very apt thing. It's funny. This touches upon something else that you brought up in one of your write-ups, and I was talking to Karen Schless or Karen Presley the other day for another episode, and she talked about seeing this guy running past her house in a wetsuit every day. And it's funny because you also had experience with this, and there are not many people in the world who even know what the precursor to the purification program is or was. And you and Karen both have direct experience with this, and it's kind of amazing to me. But the reason I'm bringing it up, Val, is maybe you can explain what this quote sweat program is, because this demonstrates perfectly Hubbard's quote unquote research that he did that then resulted in all of these different things that he has pushed off on people and sold to people subsequently based on his research. So why don't you explain what the sweat program was?
Okay, he started it as something that only people who had taken LSD were supposed to do.
Yeah, he had a big thing about LSD. LSD
Right.
was somehow the boogeyman that was, beyond all other drugs.
Right. And he had specific things that those people were supposed to do. And then it was like kind of like, well, gee, I can probably do some better stuff with this and that. And so he created what's called a drug bomb.
Hubbard believed that LSD didn't leave your body, but
Right.
was stored in the fat tissues of your body. And that as a result of that, you could have LSD flashbacks because the drug would reenact somehow years later because it was still stored in your fat.
Yeah, and that made you ineligible for Sea Org, which was probably good for a lot of people. They kind of liked the fact that they couldn't do it because of that. But the thing about that, I'm trying to see if I can find the drug bomb really quick, because the drug bomb actually was a really specific set of drugs not drugs, vitamins and stuff that he made you take. So you had to take, and it was really gross. And the thing is that he kept modifying this as he went along. So you didn't know when he started, I think it was about in 78. And then he kept modifying it. And by the time I got on it, let me see here, the drug bomb was 1,000 milligrams of niacin, 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C, 5,000 milligrams of carbonate, 25 milligrams of B6, 200 milligrams of B complex, 100 milligrams of pantothenic acid. And you had to take that 3 times a day. So that's 3,000 milligrams of niacin a day. And then you had to drink CalMag, which is, it's a mixture. Drink calcium gluconate, magnesium carbonate, and vinegar dissolved in boiling water. And it was really, really gross.
The thing about the wetsuit, like when Karen said to me, there was this guy that was running past.
But Hubbard wouldn't, but when it came to the pure, but he only allowed us to eat 2 ounces of liquid protein a day and then juicing. So that's also important. And then you had to run at least an hour a day in a wetsuit.
A rubberized suit. And the theory of this was that you were going to lose all of your body fat and therefore lose all of the LSD.
Right. And you also had to eat oil. You had to have tablespoons of oil.
That's to replace the fat that you're losing.
Right, exactly.
With new good fat or something. Mm-hmm. In any event, this was, and I just want to say this was like, I remember the first people that were doing this at the INT base. And I think Janice Grady was one of them. And these people were required, and then David Mayo, and there were people that were required to, David Mayo was the running program. He wasn't the, he wasn't the sweat program. I think Janice was on the sweat program. And it was like Hubbard came up with this cockamamie idea that people who had taken LSD couldn't be trusted. So we need to deal with the problem of people who've taken LSD that can't be trusted, because we've got a bunch of them around who have joined the Sea Org before I invented the rule that LSD is no good and you can't join the Sea Org if you've taken LSD. So how are we going to cure these people of their insanity? And Hubbard was always coming up with new ways to cure the insanity of the people around him, who all ended up being so incompetent and so crazy and so messed up that they could never do anything, according to him.
Well,
and
yeah, does it sound familiar? People say it started with Miscavige. It didn't. Hubbard
no,
said
it
the same
absolutely started with Hubbard, Val. Absolutely.
Yep.
Miscavige just assumed that trait of Hubbard, like he has assumed so many of Hubbard's traits. But the idea that LSD lodges in the fatty tissues of the body and can somehow be expelled by losing the fat has never, ever been proven by anybody anywhere. But Hubbard, who came up with ideas and then was so convinced of his own rightness that they became truth in his mind, then set out and started with, okay, so dress up in a put on literally a rubberized suit with elastic around the ankles and arms and top so that no circulation occurs, so that you're sweating inside it, running like out in the hot,
the heat of the day,
Gilman hot springs, or even in Florida. The sweat that these people produced was phenomenal. I mean, I know I saw some, they'd open the bottom of their rubberized suit and it would just like run out all over their feet. It was gross. But this was the research that he did, that he then went, well, we don't really need to do it that way. We can just stick people in a sauna and have them sweat for 5 hours in a sauna. And that is where the purification program came from.
But you know what? We paid for that research. We paid to do it was $1,500 per person to do that sweat program.
Val, I totally understand. You pay for everything in Scientology. There's nothing that you don't pay for. And whether you're a guinea pig or not, and and
I had a miscarriage because of that.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's why I stopped doing it. It actually changed shortly after that.
That's tragic. That's terrible. Is there anything that you haven't had a chance to say in what we've been talking about that you want to say?
Just don't trust Hubbard's research. It's not research. Is anybody still thinking that he did any research?
Oh, there are so many examples of that, Val. So many examples, like everything. I wrote about this with respect to the introspection rundown, because I was there for the one and only guinea pig of the introspection rundown. The introspection rundown, for people who don't know, is what Hubbard claimed is the cure for psychosis, which was what Lisa McPherson was subjected to in the Fort Harrison Hotel. And I happened to be there on the Apollo for the one and only person who did the introspection rundown, named Bruce Welch. I was one of the guards sitting outside the door to make sure that nobody disturbed Bruce Welch, because I had just arrived on the Apollo at the time. And I watched what happened, and then I watched this come out as a Hubbard bulletin, which laid out, this is absolute dictated truth now, that this is how you handle anybody in what Scientologists called a psychotic break or a psychotic episode. And this was all based on that one guy.
Wow.
And that's it. There was no other other research. There was nothing else. I mean, his research into the OT levels and OT3 was taking a bunch of drugs. So yeah, beware of believing that you're getting any good sort of research from the works of L. Ron Hubbard. And despite the fact that Scientology claims that Scientology is the merger of religion and science, there is no science in Scientology.
Or
and
religion.
There has never been any scientific study or evidence-based research or research with controlled, how you're supposed to do scientific research that has proven anything in Scientology. Not the purification program, not the running program, not auditing, not being able to go exterior with full perception, nothing. And that is something that Scientology tries to not talk about.
Yeah.
And lead people to believe that this is a workable technology, not a belief system, but a technology. It is actual proven methods and systems for how to do things and how to handle things. And it's all a bunch of bunk.
Yeah. Well, people aren't proven methods. I mean, I can't handle your personality the same way I handle my personality. That's the thing that Hubbard got wrong.
Among many other things.
Right. But I mean, if we start there, and then we can just say everything else is wrong, because no two people are the same. My two children were polar opposites.
Yep. So, ours too.
Yeah. So it's like I could not treat my daughter the same way I treated my son and expected the same results. So why could Hubbard say you do this way and expect the same results with every single person?
I hear you, and I couldn't agree more. Again, Val, thank you so much for taking the time to spend explaining your experiences in Scientology and some of the horrifying things about Scientology today. I hope that this hasn't ruined your weekend. That you have an enjoyable rest of the weekend, and we'll probably be talking again because I know you have more to say.
Okay, we'll see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in. You can find more episodes of Exposing Scientology wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to check out my best-selling book, A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. It's available on Amazon, hardback, softback, and as an audiobook. Until next time, be well and happy.